I'm waiting until 6. There we go. We're going live. All right, you can go ahead and start.
Welcome to MacReads 2021, presenting Becoming an Anti-Racist. Very excited to have this partnership with Third Street Books, Linfield University, and McMinnville Public Library. I'm Jenny Berg. I'm the library director at the McMinnville Public Library. MacReads is a co-sponsored program between those three groups that I just mentioned, and this has been a really exciting opportunity. We've done something a little bit different this year with, first of all, featuring 2 books, Me and White Supremacy by Layla F. Saad and The Racial Healing Handbook by Jacqueline Sinek. I believe I have that author right. And we have also featured a variety of speakers throughout the 3 months that we've been hosting MacReads. And I'm very pleased to introduce Cinthia Manuel. I'm particularly pleased to introduce her because I had the wonderful pleasure to watch her a few years ago at a McMinnville TEDx, where she gave an excellent presentation on mentorship and mentoring. I highly recommend taking a look back at YouTube and watching that TEDx talk from Cinthia. Cinthia is an equity, diversity, inclusion, and leadership development consultant. And she has her own company, which I'm taking a look at, Autentica Consulting. She's a first-generation Latina, an immigrant from Mexico City, bilingual, Spanish and English, and bicultural. So I think a wonderful person to speak on the topics of anti-racism. She currently serves on the Oregon Community Foundation Latinx Community Advisory Board and other boards as well. She has over 19 years of experience working with racially diverse communities and organizations in different capacities. And this is an exciting piece. The Portland Business Journal recognized her as one of the 23 business people to watch in 2019. And so we have the great good fortune of getting to watch Cinthia in her in the work that she's doing right now, which is part of all the greater work that she does in our community and beyond. Let's see, what else can I tell you that's wonderful about Cinthia? She holds a strategic diversity and inclusion management certificate from Georgetown University and completed a master's in business administration from George Fox University. So Cinthia has quite a wealth of experience behind her educationally, and I'm sure experientially, and I really look forward to her conversation this evening. Cinthia Manuel, take it away.
Thank you so much. All right, well, let me get ready to present. All right, just 1 second here. You can just give me a thumbs up that you see this presentation. Fantastic. Well, we are in business. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. I am Cinthia Manuel, and I am extremely excited to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation from MacReads to be here and be part of the incredible lineup of speakers that they have had this entire past couple months. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to kind of share a little bit of my perspective about being an anti-racist. What does that mean? Why is that important? Why does this matter? And what I'm going to provide is just a quick overview of, what does it really take to be an anti-racist, and why are some of the things that we need to know even before we claim that we want to be an anti-racist. So what I'm going to do next is, again, let me see. Here you go. All right. So I'm going to show you some information as part of my presentation. I'm going to share with you information that maybe is new to you, maybe you have seen before. So all I'm asking is just to stick with me and to see things through a different lens. It might, at the end of it, you might be like, Cinthia, thank you so much for that. But, we'll put that in the, on a piece of paper and we'll file it. Or you might be like, awesome, Cinthia, I learned something new. I have a different perspective. I will make sure to use that moving forward. However you decide to use this information is totally okay. All I'm asking you again is just to give me a chance to provide you a different perspective from my life experience, from who I am, from the work that I do. I'm also not saying that I'm an expert on it. I'm not saying that I know it all. I am also part of this journey along with all of you. All right. Before I start with any of my presentations, any information that I want to share about, talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, talking about anti-racism, talking about race, talking about, justice, it's very important to know ourselves. And that's part of the work. So with that said, one of the things that I really encourage is, I actually found this incredible, what is called the Emotion Sensation Wheel from Lindsay Brayman. And basically what she does is saying, hey, we all have emotions, right? We all react to information very differently. And we sometimes do voice what those emotions look like. But how do they actually feel, and how do they actually represent and show up in our bodies? Because as we know, body language is sometimes the only way that we can actually tell or assume how the person feels or what the reactions that you're having to the information is kind of evoking in you. So the way that you use this wheel, and actually I encourage you to go to her website. You do have to pay for it. I pay for this for a license, but if you want to use it for your own personal purposes, it's extremely affordable. Like extremely affordable. I think I pay like $5 or something. So don't quote me on that, but it's extremely affordable, and I highly recommend it. Basically what she said is you have to identify the emotion first, right? So you start in the first circle and you say, if you're angry, okay, what does that angry look like, right? So you go to the next circle. Is angry feeling hurt? Is that feeling aggressive? Is that feeling mad? Is that feeling irritated? And how is your body actually translating that emotion? Are you hiding? Are you, is your heart racing? Is your jaw tight, right? And again, it is so important, especially as we're doing this work, especially as we start talking about race, especially as we're talking about our own personal journey in this process, that we are probably going to be somewhere in this wheel at all times. And the more you understand how your body reacts, the more you understand how you respond to information, you're going to start noticing patterns of things that are helping you, that are making you uncomfortable, comfortable, or even just a little bit curious. And again, that's extremely important because as we're doing this work, we had to start with ourselves. And one of the ways, again, to do that is by understanding what our emotions are telling us and what is that evoking in us. Because we might be saying one thing, but we definitely feel a different way. So I want to offer that here because, like I said, it's been an incredible tool that I have used. All right, so this is another graphic. She's awesome. She has a social work background, and she creates all these great graphics. And so when I saw this one, I was like, oh, I had to put it here. So, this when we start talking about anti-racism or just racism in general, I really was attracted to her graphic because she says here, how I thought racism worked before anti-racism education. How many of us at some point have reacted to a question of, are you racist? Without having any information aside from just what we sometimes believe that word means. How many of you at some point said, when people say, ask you if you're a racist, you say yes or no, right? And the situations might be different. I mean, even think about, I was just watching the news. I'm sure some of you also watch the news, right? After the interview with Oprah Winfrey, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, and then Prince William, they asked him, is your family a racist? And he said no, right? So think about those instances where you have somebody has been approached and the answer is like, oh my God, like, and even you get flustered that somebody even asked you that question or somebody assumed that about you, because what we think about what the word racist means or represent, sometimes we feel like it's way beyond who we are, or the values that we represent don't match that at all. And so when I looked at the bottom of the graphic and says, all right, so if we don't have any education whatsoever about what does it look like to be an anti-racist, yes, we're going to react to words because they're going to trigger, they're going to activate something within us, right? Going back to that wheel, how does that make you feel? And once you start your process and understanding, well, let me see what an anti-racist is. Let me see what that looks like as a journey for me. Then you can start seeing a spectrum and saying, all right, are you an anti-racist? Are you a non-racist? Or are you over-racist, right? And this is when we need to have a conversation with ourselves, a very frank conversation with ourselves, or what we feel and understand and know about that. So what I was appreciating about the chart that she used here, or the image that she used here, is if you bring your eyes towards the middle of the spectrum, there's in the middle it says, where most people who deny any racism probably are, right? So again, when you think about, am I racist? A lot of people are going to be like, no way, like, I'm a good person. I have never done any harm to others. I don't wish anything bad on anybody else. Again, without really understanding what that really is. So unpacking it a little bit, understanding what that looks like is really helpful to understand why the difference between an anti-racist, a non-racist, and somebody who is racist is. All right. I am using a definition of racism. So again, before I can even walk through and saying, here is what you can do to be an anti-racist, we need to again understand how racism shows up and what racism is. So I actually took this definition from Dismantling Racism. It's a website that is incredible, has a lot of resources. Highly recommend for you to go there. The founders of the website were so kind to leave a lot of the information and research that they have done through the years up for people to go see and digest and learn. And so I took this piece from there that it said, racism is ordinary. It is the normal way that society does business. The common everyday experience of most BIPOC communities and people in this country. Okay? Can I read it again? Racism is ordinary. The normal way that society does business. I just want to sit with that a little. The common everyday experience of most BIPOC communities and people in this country. So when we say, you're like, all right, so what does the normal way mean? Why are we talking about this? How is that, it highlights BIPOC. So BIPOC just stands, is spelled Black Indigenous People of Color. So some people use people of color, some people use some people use BIPOC, again, which is Black Indigenous People of Color. And so this is just when you're referring to the community. And so, again, that's the term that they use on Dismantling Racism. So that's the one that I'm sharing with you. But when we think about the normal way that society does business, that's implying that racism is part of our everyday lives. That's implying that racism it could be in the language that we use, it could be in the mannerisms that we use, it could be in the decision making that we make every single day. It means that is how you show up, how you dress or don't dress. Again, right? Like it's saying it's here, it's normal, and we adapted it to it so much that it's extremely hard to actually see it for what it is. But BIPOCs or people of color will see that everywhere. And believe me, it's not that it's a choice. As a brown woman, as a Latina, as a Mexicana, as an immigrant who came to this country, I don't want to engage myself in racist engagements, and when I'm talking to people, anything like that. But it happens, and racism happens in various different ways, all the way from how the place that I am doing business in, to who I'm talking to how people express themselves about me. And I will tell you that I hang around people that are very well-intentioned people, right? And so I will get to that in a minute. But I guess, again, I thought when I saw this definition of racism that it was really, it really kind of presented in a way that to me, it really highlighted that racism is here and is everywhere, but it's also how it affects every single day individuals that are part of BIPOC communities or communities of color. All right, so we have that racism, right? And so where did the racism came from? How is that racism evolved, or who does racism highlight or not? And so I'm not gonna go in a lot of detail on this because we have some great speakers from this MacReads series that actually kind of dove deeper into this, but I just felt that it will just be helpful for some of you who haven't seen this before, just to have a little bit of idea, but highly encourage you to go watch the other speakers. So back in 1787, the U.S. Constitution, all right, they actually they started doing race classifications, and where in the U.S. Constitution, they actually signed, and it was a very specific language that classified African Americans as 3/5 of a man. Okay? Highlighting again that they were not a full person, that they were not worthy enough of being one individual. And right around the same time, in Europe, the science came and said, hey, we actually want to start classifying individuals based on their skull, based on how big the skull is. And we're going to make these categories that will help define who is actually most intelligent, who's not intelligent, who is worthy enough of that intelligence, and who's not. And so they came out with this OIDS classification. There's one missing here, but the first one was Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Negroid, and the other one that is not here is Austroids. And so basically it said Caucasoid was defined as the one that was more intelligence, and then Negro was actually classified as the lowest in its class. And so when you start thinking about, well, who were these Caucasoids, who were these Negroids? Caucasoids were white people. And it was just really highlighted to say, hey, we're gonna actually find ways to justify that white people are a higher class, that white people are the ones that can make the decisions, that white people are the ones that need to be at the very top of this racial classification. And then we're gonna go down the other categories and we're gonna devalue them based on specific characteristics. And so why do I bring that up? I bring that up because this conversation about race this conversation about classification, language that was used to identify each racial category kept getting embedded and embedded and embedded into our systems, into the way that we communicate with each other, into what information gets delivered to us. And back in the day, people, like there were white people specifically didn't see anything wrong with it, right? They were just like, fantastic, we are the smartest, we're the most intelligent class. And that actually had a ripple effect on anyone that was not classified as white, that was not classified as a Caucasoid. So this is where the word Caucasian comes from. And even this racial classification was very racist, because it really highlighted, again, the valuing individuals based not only on their size of the cranium, which really is nothing scientific about it, but also the skin color. And if you start looking at the line, which I'm going to share here, this is where the racial hierarchy started kind of shaping up a little bit. Okay. So here I put buckets. So these are buckets. I don't know if you can tell they're buckets, but they're buckets. And this is how, how I want to explain this to you. So we talked about the craniums. We talked about the oids. We talked about how language is already being embedded into how we communicate every single day, into ideas that were being planted in our systems about individuals, specifically individuals that were not white, that had a different skin color. And basically, that's how racism started being kind of shaped, where white was at the very top or at the very front of the category. Then it's Asian, then Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latinx, Latine, whichever term you want to use, then Black, and then many times, Native Americans were even excluded from this racial hierarchy. So that's why I put it at the very end. So when we talk about, we talk about the census, or we talk about, when we're talking about, well, who's being oppressed, or who's being, who races those affect the most, again, many times we leave out Native Americans out of the conversation. So again, I just wanted to bring that up. But when you start looking at these buckets, and the reason why I put them in buckets is because, especially like I said, in Europe, when they started coming out with the oids, there was this whole idea of, well, let's start creating races. Let's start creating these buckets, and each of these buckets is going to have a different, it's going to have different skills. It's going to have a different level of intelligence. It's going to have a different level of accessibility, resources. And even though sometimes we're like, well, we're not very different. We're all, from the same country. We all have the same benefits, the same abilities, the same accessibility. In reality, we don't. So it was when Jeannie introduced me at the beginning, she mentioned that I was an immigrant. So I actually was born and raised in Mexico. And when I was in Mexico, I was called Mexicana, Mexican. That was my only categorization that I had at that point. When I come to the United States, that's not even an option for me. When I came to the United States, the only option back then was me being called Hispanic. And so I went and I said, okay, so I'll be called Hispanic. And I'm trying to figure out at the same time, okay, well, this must be the thing that you have to do to be a member of the United States, right? So I'm going to go into this bucket called Hispanic. Okay, fine. And then over time, it switched to Latino, Latina, because Hispanic really is talking about more like the descendants from Spanish-speaking countries, which could be European countries. It could be Central America, North America, South America countries. So Latino, Latina was really specifically talking about just North America, Central America, and South America. So at some point, it's like, well, if you want to align with that term, fantastic. And then now is, as we're going to talking about gender neutral, we want to make sure that, the term changed to Latinx. And I, as an individual, have to keep jumping in this bucket in and out. I have no choice whatsoever of which bucket I want to be part of. My skin, I'm a very proud brown woman. And I am, and when I look at these buckets, again, I don't have a choice. And what's worse is that what's in this bucket defines me. Whichever information you have heard in the past, whichever narco series you have watched on Netflix, you might align Latinos, Latinas, Latinx, Hispanics with drugs, with violence, with guns. And that might be the only information you have. But that puts us in a category. And when we're thinking about, the Asian community, even being in the, in these buckets, doesn't give us, it just assumes that everybody is the same. We're talking about Asian, there's a lot of different categories of, within the Asian communities. Same thing with Hispanics, Latinos, Latinx, same thing with Blacks. But it is easier to bucket us into categories than it is to actually make sure that we are seen for who we are, for what we bring to the table, for the crossovers that sometimes we have, for that intersectionality that we bring. And so when you look at this racial hierarchy, the reason why I really wanted to highlight it was because when you see on the left-hand side, white is the closer you get to white, the more power, the less ideas of you being a bad person, a bad individual, keep lessening. The closer you get to Black, then you start hearing racial slurs. You start hearing assumptions about the Black community, the African American community. And, and the same thing with Native Americans. Every single of these buckets, if you start thinking about the language that is being used to describe each bucket, individuals that fall into these buckets are very hurtful. And that is something I, as an individual, cannot control. And as much as I would like it to stop, the media does a really great job to ensure I don't forget where my bucket lands on this lineup. So I'm actually showing you a couple ads of how just, many people say, well, race is not an issue. Race is not important. Race is not an issue. But it is. And so here are just a lot of the times when we are flipping through magazines, when we're talking to individuals, when we hear information on the news, on the radio, there's all this language that keeps coming up. And this language that keeps reinforcing that racial hierarchy that I just showed you, those buckets and what those buckets represent. So on the right-hand side, I have an ad actually by Sony, by PlayStation. And basically what they wanted to promote was that there was going to be a new PlayStation in the color of white. That was all. That was the whole purpose. So this marketing agency went and it's like, all right, so we had to tell the world that we have a new color for a PlayStation. What a better way to represent it than to actually show a white woman dressed in white holding the jaw of a Black kid dressed in black. And so when Sony was asked, well, so what do you think you were doing here? They're like, oh, I think we misinterpreted the idea that we wanted to show. They didn't even call it what it was, right? And so some people may be like, oh, Cinthia, well, why is such a big deal? Like it was, an oopsie, like people were well-intended, they had good intentions, nobody was racist. But when you do acts, because it wasn't just one person in marketing that said, absolutely, let's agree on this. It was many people. It went through many people. I used to work for, my major is marketing. I started with marketing, my career. So I know it takes a lot of people to get a yes and to get a print. And so if you go down the line, for somebody that didn't catch this as extremely disgusting, to be quite frank, it just tells you that people that where they fall into the racial hierarchy, if they haven't been exposed to discrimination, if they haven't exposed to insensitive language, if they have not been exposed to disparities, right? They're not gonna see anything wrong with this. They probably said it's entertaining, catchy, different, unique. The next ad is on the bottom of that. On the ad is actually Nivea, and with the tagline "White is purity." And so even again the language, right? If you go back and think about the racial hierarchy, and think about even the Caucasoids or the oils and how they were created, and like the power and the level of privilege that even that word carries, it tells you that we're not good enough to even be white. The next ad here, it says everyone is normal inside. It's a black man, and inside the black man is a blue-eyed white person, which it tells you that being black is not good enough. You have to be white in the inside to be good enough, right? And normal is this, acting, being again, being embedded within the white culture. The last ad is actually H&M. They came out with these hoodies, and the way that they photograph these kids, again, one, you have the white kid who says survival expert, and then you have the black kid that says coolest monkey in the jungle. And, again, when H&M says like, oh, it was a mistake, it wasn't, we didn't mean it, like it wasn't, we were not being racist. But again, the language that you use keeps reinforcing that racial hierarchy, keep saying, keep white at the top. Why is what your goal is. And if you are in these buckets, my skin color is never going to allow me to be white. My accent that I carry is never going to allow me to be white. And even then, right? Like think about people that have an accent and they have a European descent. How many of you have not said in the past, "Ooh, that's great. Ooh, Italian. Ooh," and really kind of celebrate the accent. I have an accent. I'm Mexican. If I could tell you how many times people have talked about my accent, have said, "Cinthia, I wish you came with subtitles because I can't understand you. Cinthia, I can't understand what you're saying, therefore you shouldn't be in management. Cinthia, can you communicate with others?" Me having an accent and me falling into the bucket of the Hispanic, Latino, Latinx bucket, it makes people highlight my accent, but not in a positive way. It doesn't in a negative way. And it actually makes me feel that speaking a second language is looked down upon instead of celebrated. And so when we think about the quote that I share with you again for Dismantling Racism, where it says, "It is a common everyday experience for BIPOCs." I don't go and ask, "Hey, can somebody please make a comment that reminds me that I don't belong here?" I don't. But people do it because it's accepted, because it's celebrated, because it's validated. Here, there's a lot of racial laws, a lot of norms, again, that keep reinforcing the racial hierarchy. So when we think about, you're like, all right, so talk a little bit about this, Cinthia, which is systemic racism, right? So here, for example, we'll start on the left-hand side where it says, what are the U.S. federal holidays? When I look at the list, and this list has changed, this is the 2021, but this list, if we look back 10 years ago and even farther, there were holidays that are celebrated that don't take into consideration the religion diversity that exists within this country. Because what it said is like, we're going to celebrate Christmas and we're going to give you 2 days off for Christmas. which means which is basically telling you we're celebrating Christianity. And if you're not Christian, well, then you get 2 days off. But when you have a holiday, a religious holiday for you that doesn't fall within our holiday lineup, then I'm sorry, but I can give you the day off. And so we might think about it when you look at the holidays. Sometimes we're just like, oh, how many days do I have off? What can I do? Where can I go? But again, if we will start looking at the holiday list and saying, who is the holiday list benefiting? Who is the holiday list including and validating? It's definitely not me. Over time, one of the things I want to highlight is the resident alien card, which is kind of like buried in the middle right here. I was trying to fit pictures. But so when I came to the United States, I came as a resident, as a permanent resident. And I had literally this exact same card. They call it a green card, but it's pink. I don't understand why, but it's called a green card. So I had this card, and then at the very top of the card, it reads resident alien. What a beautiful way to tell me I don't belong. What an awesome way to remind me that I'm probably very different. And I think about when white people, Americans, go to other countries, and even Europeans go to another country and they go there and they become residents. They call expats, right? Expatriates. They're not called aliens. But they do call me an alien, or they did call me an alien before I became a citizen because I carried that card. That's what I was to the government of the United States. Another reminder that, hey, Cinthia, you're other than white. What I have here is, we have, even, when I talk about laws and I talk about like, how does racism show? The voting, not letting Black people be able to vote, right? Like we can talk about segregation also was racist norm, which I was basically saying, we're going to keep you out as much as possible. We're going to take power, we're going to take privilege out as much as we can, because, again, we're looking at the racial hierarchy, white stays at the top. In Portland, Oregon, right, we had internment camps for Japanese. They were told, hey, during the war, we're gonna actually take your stuff. We're gonna put you into the convention center, which used to have livestock in it. And now we're gonna put you in here, and we have the right to ask you to do so. You are not worth enough for you to bring everything that you earn through your life. We're gonna tell you what you can and cannot bring. Same thing happened with the land, right? Indian land. They had this, the U.S. made this treaty with Native Americans about giving them their land, giving them ownership after they took it away. They broke that treaty. And when they broke the treaty, they basically sold Native American land to white people so they can build their homes. In Texas, people were literally said, we don't want any Blacks, we don't want any Mexicans. Speaking Spanish, if people heard you speak Spanish, you could go to jail. Again, not a European speaking English, Mexican speaking Spanish. I have, when I was in high school, I had quite a few teachers from Texas who said, I actually lost speaking my language because my family was so afraid that we were gonna get put into jail because we spoke Spanish. So we forgot to speak Spanish so we could assimilate, so we could be seen as good enough to be in this country. When we talk about redlining, if you watch the series that MacReads very graciously offer access to, Raise the Power of Illusion, there's a whole 30-minute video that talks about redlining. And even though we might today be like, oh, we're not racist, like we're better, we're coming out together as a community, start looking at the communities that are getting less resources. Who are those? So, like I think about even when COVID hit, how many kids, and especially kids who were Black, Indigenous, Latinos, Asian Americans, some of them didn't have access to Wi-Fi. And this, I'm not saying that they were the only ones, but when you start looking at the numbers, it was pretty big. And yet sometimes many of us say, well, that's not racist. That's not racism. It is. And we have to live every single day. The last picture I have here is just this group of very nice looking people here, mostly light skin and dressed in suits. And even think about in your work, when you say in your handbook where it says dress professionally. This is what professionally looks like. This is what professional looks like. If my hair doesn't look that way, I'm not professional. If the way that I dress doesn't look that way, I'm not professional. I have to code switch every single time that I do a presentation, that I have a speaking engagement. I have to think, what is I'm gonna wear the second I wake up? Because whatever I wear, however I show up, I'm either reinforcing what you already think about me or my bucket. And I have literally microseconds to respond to you. And again, my response could or could not validate what you already think of me, especially if it's negative. And that stress is extremely tiring. So this is, again, so we're going to start now the transition of, all right, Cinthia, you kind of share a little bit about how racism can show up. But a lot of the time, we're just, especially when we talk about racism, we beat around the bush. And we have to racialize it. So what does that mean, Cinthia? All right. A lot of the times when we are having conversations, and let me tell you, conversations about race, they're not comfortable. I do trainings and I talk about race, and I still don't feel like, all right, let's all together come and have this conversation. It's difficult. It is very difficult, and I don't know that it's ever gonna get easy. But when we're having conversations, it has been my experience that, especially if you're white, and you might make a comment and say, well, we really try to welcome everybody, or or you might use the term us. We are very inclusive. Everybody is welcome here. But what I'm asking you to do is to start racializing. Well, who is welcome when you say we? When you say us? Who is wanted? Who are you serving? Instead of just saying we, be very specific. White people like myself, brown people like myself, Black people are being killed. Almost on the daily, right? Be specific. Those people in my community are getting bullied. Well, who's getting bullied? Who is we? Who is us? Because if we don't racialize it, we're gonna continue to build this idea that racism is not around, that racism doesn't show up often. When we start racializing this, you're gonna start seeing patterns. When you start seeing which communities actually are being bullied, killed, discriminated against, it's gonna give you a whole different perspective. So that's the one thing I will say. As you're starting your anti-racist journey, please, please, please start racializing your conversations. If you say I, say I as a white woman, I as a white man, I as a gender neutral person, right? Like, just mention who you're talking about and who you're trying to highlight in your conversation. All right, so I'm gonna touch super briefly, probably for like a minute, on identity, power, and privilege. So we talked about racializing this. We talked about how racism is showing or not showing up. And so this is actually one exercise that I do in my trainings. So if you're watching and you're in my trainings, it's probably gonna look familiar. But it's basically called the diversity petal. And what this is doing is just basically highlighting our identities. So every person is gonna be different. Yes, I'm Mexicana. Yes, I'm Hispanic. Yes, I'm Latina, Latinx. I'm a woman, right? But there's much more to just what you see on the outside that you don't see on the inside. And so it's very important as you're talking about, well, how can I be an anti-racist? How am I showing up? What is the power that I have? And what is the privilege that I carry? When you look at this diversity petal, I highly encourage you to do it. So basically it has 8 petals, and it's going to help you, identify your identity. And it's going to help us identify how much power is attached to that identity, as well as what the privilege it is that you have. The more identities that you have that carry high levels of power and privilege, the more you're going to start reaching, you're probably going to start seeing that racial hierarchy again. And you can compare it to the less power and less privilege based on the identities you carry that you start seeing, you're going to start seeing a disparity in between who has more power and privilege versus who doesn't. So how do you figure that out? When you're talking about race, ask yourself, which race is the dominant race in the United States? That is white. Which gender is the dominant gender in the United States? Like if you say, which gender is the dominant gender in the United States? Which age group is the more dominant age group in the United States? Men on physical ability. Are individuals with physical disabilities holding power? No, it's individuals with an able body. Sexual orientation. Are individuals that are part of the LGBTQA plus community, do they hold the power? No. Heterosexual is, or cisgender. Class, social class. Which social class is holding the power? Is it the upper class? Middle class? Education-wise, who holds the power with the levels of education that you carry? Same thing with religion, right? When you start looking at this and you start seeing which identities are dominant, to the dominant piece of it, start adding privilege. You have more access, more resources. When I actually, Jeannie was reading my education, and some people may be like, awesome, you have a master's degree, that's great. Well, I will share with you that when I was looking for a job in Portland in 2016, it took me about a year to find a job. My education wasn't enough. Regardless of me having experience working since I was 18 years old in corporate America. I was being told, Cinthia, you need this. Cinthia, you need that. I wish you had a certificate. I wish you had this. I wish you had that. It didn't matter. So when you're looking at your petal and I'm looking at race, I'm not part of the dominant race, right? Even in gender, males are seen as that have, higher levels of power. Age. Who in Congress is making decisions? What age do they look like? Right? So when you start seeing that, then you start unpacking that a little bit. And I also want to mention something before I move on to the next slide. When you're talking about privilege, a lot of people are like, whoa. Privilege is like, this word that you're telling me I'm too privileged, but, I can barely make my car payments. I can barely have, buy a house. And that's not necessarily when we're talking about privilege. It's who's getting access to information that you're being the race that you are didn't affect you getting the access to that information. And so I hold privilege. Absolutely do I hold privilege. And when it comes to my education and when I come to my community, and when I say my community is within the Latino community, I know that there's not that many Latinos or Hispanics that were able to go to college. I did. So my level of education, I can actually say I have that privilege. How can I use that privilege that I have? How can I use my voice that I have? How can I use my network that I have to make a change? And so when I look at privilege, I don't necessarily am looking at the negativity of the privilege, but I'm saying, how can I flip the narrative so then I can use this privilege that I carry, which is not much when you're looking at my petal, but it's something, right? I have something. And so how can I flip this, can I use this to make a difference, to truly be an anti-racist, to truly start giving voice to individuals within my Latino community that have not had a chance to do so. I just found this comic and I thought it summarized what I've been sharing with you pretty well. It says, I've heard the rhetoric from both sides. Time to do my own research, right? So Cinthia, you told me this and I also know this. And then Google comes up and it's literally the first link that agrees with what you already believe. And you're like, jackpot, I knew it. Cynthia's wrong. Right? So again, when we're starting to think about what do we need to do, what is the process we need to go through to become anti-racist, a lot of the times it's going to be really hard to believe others, to go against what we've been taught, to go against what we believe, to go against what we're used to doing or being. So, you know, when I wanted to put this quote here, it says, being racist or anti-racist is not about who you are. It is about what you do. A lot of times we get stuck, right? And we're just like, well, I'm not a racist, well, I'm not anti-racist. And it's like, well, how do you know? And all these things. And truly is, what are the actions that we're taking to become an anti-racist? And if we're not taking any actions, you know, there are going to be times where our actions will be racist, or language will be racist. But we have to kind of continuously keep working on that to understand what does that look like. So how can you start your anti-racist journey? What are the things that you need to start doing and stop doing? So before we get to that, I just want to share this, and I said this earlier. You know, you probably heard this a lot, where it says, be comfortable being uncomfortable. And quite frank, I don't know that it is comfortable being uncomfortable. I don't know who has gotten to that point, because when you're having conversations about race, especially when you're unpacking who you are, what beliefs you hold, how your actions have harmed others, or, you know, brought wrong information to others, it is extremely uncomfortable to talk about this. And I just want to acknowledge that it is okay to be uncomfortable. And I encourage you to actually seek that level of discomfort, because that is the only way that you're going to know that you're learning. If we get to a point when we're comfortable, then we're not really pushing ourselves. So you really have to kind of push on the uncomfortable side things. All right, so what can you do in your community? So as you're thinking about the little bit that I shared with you, and I really encourage you again to go and watch the incredible lineup of speakers. They went into more details than I did when it came to race and you know, and everything around the topic. But what can you do in your community? When you think about being an anti-racist basically is an individual that is raising awareness about how racism shows up, and is learning and unlearning ways of doing that they were doing things before. Racism will show up through an ad, will show up through Cinthia, I wish you came with subtitles. It will show up by you know, the foods that you eat. It will show up through the interactions that you have with your neighbors. It shows up all the time. And it's because it is embedded in our systems, and it's embedded in the norms that we accept. It's embedded in the laws that we practice, right? And so it's going to take a long time to dismantle this. It's going to take a long time for us to be an anti-racist society, but it doesn't mean that you cannot start your own journey. And so one of the things too is, even as I do this work, so I do presentations and I do trainings and I do strategy with companies on how can you not only be an anti-racist, but really embed diversity, equity, and inclusion into the DNA of your organization. And I'm even in my own journey. I have to do a lot of reflecting on who I am and how I'm showing up. I, as a woman, as a brown woman, as a Latina, I internalize a lot of the ways that I was expected to act. I internalized a lot of the ways that I was expected to speak, show up. And so even how within my Latino community, there are things that I'm doing that are continuing to reinforce this racial hierarchy. Who do I invite into my neighborhood, right? So when I left, when I ended college, I bought a house for my parents. And even in this community, is the community that my parents have their house in is predominantly Latino, Hispanic. And even just the way that I was thinking, like, oh yeah, we're gonna go to the better side of town. Just even thinking that, right? Well, what is wrong with the other side? Who lives on the other side, right? Racializing. There were other Latinos that were not educated. And even again, thinking that I was going through that process and saying, oh, I want to get away from the non-educated Latinos in this community. I want to better myself. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with you, getting an education, a good job, and getting a house and a car and what you need. But it's the comments, the ideas that we process that show, that show how we discriminate others, that show how we continue to highlight and reinforce that racial hierarchy. So what can you do in the community? When you're thinking in your community, are there rules or norms within the area that you live that is pushing others out? Who is, and ask yourself these questions like, who is included in this? When you go to a park, who is playing in the park and who's not playing in the park? Why is that happening? Ask yourself that. When you're seeing, people walk in your neighborhood, don't immediately assume the worst and say, oh, great, am I being accessible, especially if they're kids? Is my neighborhood providing a sidewalk for the kids to walk? Instead of saying, I wonder what these kids that I haven't seen before want, right? Let's start flipping the way that we're looking at things. What can you do at work? Are there certain policies that are pushing individuals out? Are there certain that are excluding people from conversations? Are there policies that not letting you reach to a wider range of racially diverse customers? Are there policies, again, like your holiday schedule, that only honor a specific religion-based individuals or a specific, like Columbus, it was a colonizer. For a person of color, I don't want to celebrate Columbus, right? But I've been told to do it. What can you do within your friends? With your friends, what are the conversations that you need to have? Can you invite your friends when they make a comment that has some racist beliefs that reinforce the racial hierarchy? Can you have those conversations? Should you have those conversations? Yes, absolutely. And what can you do at home? What kind of literature can you read? What are the books that are in your bookshelf? What are the people that you're following on social media? What is your commitment to keep learning about this? I will tell you, it is exhausting. There's so much information out there. It is even exhausting for me. But I don't get the choice. I don't have the choice to not think about it. I don't have the choice to shut my brain down. During COVID, Latinos that live in the neighborhood where my parents live were dying literally left and right. People students from working families, immigrant families, didn't have access to a computer, didn't have access to Wi-Fi. They were literally out on the streets, trying to get Wi-Fi signal. And when you start seeing this and you're like, well, everybody's in the pandemic. Yeah, but who is the pandemic affecting the most? Who is the choices that I make every single day have an effect on my family, have an effect on my community, and it's a ripple effect. So when you're thinking about this and you're thinking about as an anti-racist, in order for you to be an anti-racist, you have to be committed to the learning. You have to be able to go into that community, to different communities that you're not used to going into, and learn. But not have people teach you, but being there, being present, and trying to understand what you need to do. So first of all, you need to understand, what does it mean to be white? I just gave you a super brief history of how, the racial hierarchy and how race even came about a little bit. Understand your privilege and power. Again, what are the things that you have access to, information, networks, that you can bring into the conversations. Be curious and committed to learning, right? This is the one thing I will say, like I was saying earlier, it is hard. It is extremely hard. And I'm sure there's some of you who had like broken down, some of you who just kind of gave up, some of you who are like, all right, I'm going to take it in smaller pieces because this is a lot. As long as you come back, it's okay to take a break. But please keep coming back. You have a choice, especially if you're white. You have a choice to come in and out. I don't, but you do. Often reflect on how you show up for non-white communities and individuals. How's your behavior impacting others? How are the decisions that you're making or not making impacting? Welcome feedback. So the only way that we're going to learn is to also have, be able to be ready to accept feedback. I personally know that there's a lot of, especially white people, who really want to do the work, who really are like committed to it and say, I want to learn to be an anti-racist. I want to be able to fight this fight. And there are things that they are doing sometimes that they just don't align with being an anti-racist. And if I, as a woman, as a brown woman that has already experienced racism, discrimination, has to teach others, offer you some feedback, I'm hoping and expecting for you to be open to at least hear it. And so a lot of the times we don't want other people to give us feedback, or we just don't want to do the things because we're afraid to do it. And we're asking you to please do it. We're asking you to take charge and just do it, because that's the only way you're going to be able to learn. Listen and build community, right? The trust building is going to happen only when I know that you're truly committed to this work. And it's going to take time, and it's going to happen in a few months, right? And I wish that I could give you the plug and play solution, but there's no such thing as that. And be open on where you are in your journey. So I appreciate a lot when people say, come to me, and they want to have conversations about race or conversations about my upbringing and my experience. But when you actually come and say, hey, this is where I am in my journey. I'm just starting to understand this. I'm barely trying to read some books. I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to do that. Or I have been learning about this for a little while. Yeah, I'm trying to understand more. It gives me an idea where you are, but it also helps me understand that you've been putting the work to know what an anti-racist, or even understand racism and how that shows up. So what is part of the journey is listening and learning is the first thing that you have to do in your journey. Not the speaking, not the questioning, is listening and learning, and then reflecting on it. Once you reflect on it, you need to act. If you don't do the last part, the listening and learning and reflecting will only get you so far. You have to act. You have to take action. And when you take action, I'm sure that there's this anxiety of like, I don't want to mess it up. I don't want, to not be here. And so all I want to say to you is, I tell this to a lot of people, is I'm falling too. So failing is I call it failing forward. When you try something and it doesn't work out, or when you try something and it doesn't go right. Failing forward means that you are learning, didn't come out right, you're getting up again, you're again going back to the listening and learning, reflecting and acting again. And we have to do that. You're learning. And so I'm just gonna end with this incredible, we had the book, the Racial Healing Handbook here. And so on page 100, they actually, the author shared some really great ways that you can talk about race or have these conversations that, as I told you, they're not comfortable, and I'm not sure when they will get comfortable. So here are just a few ways that you can address this. So if you're having a conversation about race, you expressing curiosity, right? So some of the verbiage you can use is, tell me more about XYZ, right? You want to learn more about the racial hierarchy. You want to learn more about your experience. You can ask in a way that it doesn't feel like, well, I'm learning, you should help me out. So this is kind of coming from a place of humility. Offer an alternative perspective. So if somebody maybe mentions something that doesn't align necessarily with being an anti-racist, or just doesn't have the facts that you have, you can offer, have you ever considered X? Right? And so, which allows you an opportunity to have a conversation. When you share this agreement, right? You can also say, I don't see it that way, the way that you do. I see it as, and then say what that is. Seek an agreement, seek an area of agreement. You can say, we don't agree on this, but I appreciate your perspective. And then you can also set a boundary. And you can say, please don't say this again around me, to me, or around me, right? Be very direct and very clear. And so a lot of this information, again, this is in page 100 of the Racial Healing Handbook. And here, again, just examples. And here I'm just offering 3 more examples that I have, offered before. This is where I am in my anti-racist journey, and I have learned that. So this is if you're in a conversation and somebody, again, mentions something that you had come to learn that is incorrect, or that it's not going to be leading in a conversation that is fruitful. You can say this. I would like to provide a different view that I have become aware of during my anti-racist journey. Again, just sharing, this is what I've been doing, and so this is where my learning is coming from. And then the last one is, I will listen to understand, because that is part of my learning and unlearning. You don't have to do all the talking all the time. And like I said, part of the journey is being a listener. And so with that, here is my info, Cinthia Autentica Consulting. Cinthia, hopefully I gave you a little bit of that information on just how to start your journey on being an anti-racist, and really listen a little bit more about how racism shows up in your everyday life. All right, Ginny.
Cinthia, thank you so much. That was really moving and helpful, great resources and examples. And I really appreciate you sharing your personal experiences. I think that that's helpful and makes things just hit home in a different way. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. I also wanted to correct myself. I said the incorrect author name for the Racial Healing Handbook. It's Annalise A. Singh. And the Me and White Supremacy, Layla F. Saad. And those are both the MacReads books for 2021. And also thank you, Cinthia, for bringing up Race, the Power of Illusion, another great resource that's part of MacReads. Your talk helped me, and I'm gonna practice some of what you talked about as a white woman, newly on my anti-racist journey. I have been thinking a lot about the being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And one of the things that helps me is to think about that aspect of how I can step in and out as a white woman, and how you can't, and BIPOC cannot, and how whatever level of discomfort that I have, it's nothing compared to what BIPOC have to go through on a regular basis. So that's one of the things I have learned, but I must say that I did do a little bit of stepping away. It's harder. It's hard work, but it's also hard in ways that I didn't expect, maybe. And I want to just thank you for this presentation that you gave tonight. Inspired me to get back to it and get back to the work. So yeah, and it's not that it hasn't, it's always on my mind, but to actually do the learning and the acting, and so to return to those, a lot of those resources, the MacReads books and other things, is something that I will definitely be doing. So I thank you for that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think honestly, as you're in your learning journey, right, there's a lot of information to consume.
Yes.
And like I said, it's okay to take a break. Absolutely. Please do. But I do encourage you to keep fighting the fight with us.
Yeah.
Because it's something that we're fighting every day in so many different ways. And that's when we start looking and seeing who is an ally, who is truly trying to really do the anti-racism work. And so that's really helpful and also encouraging and provide some hope, because I think especially BIPOC communities lately, you have the need for those allyships has exemplified drastically.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've also learned, is, and I think this is probably in the resources, but I've heard it a lot, the don't expect people of color to do the work for you. And that when people of color are doing that work and to explain, to teach, that they should be properly compensated. And I'm really pleased to see that you have a business, a consulting business, doing just this sort of work, and feel really privileged that I got to see some of your work, some of your slides that you shared with us tonight. I really appreciate that. And I guess I wanted to bring that up because there are a few, particularly women of color in my life, that are willing to help with some of those discussions. But I think it's important for white people in particular, to hear that, to know that they need to do their own work. They need to go to the resources first, not just turn to their one person of color friend or coworker to say, well, explain this to me. That's not a burden that BIPOC need to carry along with all of the other burdens. And so that is part of the resources that MacReads, a lot of the resources that you provided, Cinthia, and then also the resources of MacReads can help people as an entry point into their anti-racist work.
Absolutely. And it's so needed, right? And because I think even acknowledging that part of the compensation, it's just that, even when I offer my services sometimes and I'm not charging for it, there's like an emotional labor that is happening. I was just recently talking to somebody and saying, especially as a consultant in this space, there's this strangle, and this strangle that I'm navigating every single day, where the first one is I'm fighting the fight for survival, for people to see me as worthy enough of being part of this country, of being a citizen of this country, and fighting against all these ideologies that surround my bucket, but also me being a person of color. And then on the other side, I'm also trying to heal, right? In this part of this book, I'm trying to heal at the same time, because again, it's not like I'm asking for attacks, but they happen, and they come in very shapes, forms, and sizes. And so every day I'm trying to try to heal this wound that my life experiences have kind of left. And then at the same time, I have to teach. And again, I'm teaching not because I want to talk about racism all the time, but it's truly survival skills here. I'm trying to make sure people understand that, your decisions, that language that you use can literally have somebody killed, can literally ruin somebody's life, can really block somebody from growing, from even having some wealth, and not just anybody, but communities of color, BIPOC, specifically. And so I've seen it happen all the time. And again, not just within Latino communities, within the Black community, but the Asian community, Native American community, talking about, suicidal rates and the lack of resources that are available for specifically, students or individuals that are part of communities of color. And so that is my mission, that is my commitment as to why I'm doing this work. But truly is survival. And so when I'm doing this, I look at this triangle, and yes, it's exhausting. So when you can, like you say, Jeannie, encourage people to say, go do your research, learn, ask questions, keep asking, keep getting these resources, watch the videos, read the books. Then when you come into the table and you say, hey, like I'm understanding, and this is what I've been doing. And that's why I said, like, when you share that journey, to me, it says, the commitment versus me wanting to be like, all right, so let me explain this to you because you might make a difference because of the power and privilege you hold. It makes our conversations deeper and more genuine and more human.
Mm-hmm. So you held up and just mentioned the Racial Healing Handbook and talked about that, part of your triangle is a healing. Did you find that the Racial Healing Handbook was helpful for your healing?
Yes, I will say that yes. So think about, like I was thinking about earlier, and I was like, it's like this wound, that something that happens to me just keeps poking and poking and getting bigger and bigger. And so part of the healing is to actually give myself some time to reflect, myself some time to see how I am unlearning the ways how white supremacy shows up in my life and the ways that I'm exemplifying white supremacy. I love this book a lot because it has questions and they seem very simple questions to ask. You're just like, really? But the process that you are going through as an individual to answer this question, it can really be, it reminds you of who you are. And some of the questions that I answer here, it kind of just reaffirm of my worthiness as a human being. And that really filled my heart. That really gave me more energy to keep going. And it's going to be a long process, right? I have good days and sometimes I have bad days. But when I was going through the book and just trying to understand even what I think about race, there's an assumption that because I'm a consultant and I do this all the time, that I know what I'm talking about 100%, right? And I mean, I know enough to be dangerous, but there's so much to learn and unlearn. Like I mentioned through my presentation, when I was in college, I assimilated, even in my professional life, I assimilated a lot because I wanted to fit within the norms that were accepted. And I pushed myself away from my Latino community, from my BIPOC community. And so even as I'm coming back, as I'm re-entering my communities and wanting to be part of that, this book really helped me kind of just understand what is the process that I'm going through and just help me reflect on my own personal journey and how far I am from truly being the anti-racist, right? Because there might be some actions that, yes, are anti-racist that I do, and some actions that I continue to use to reinforce a racial hierarchy. And that happens, and that will happen. And so being mindful of what are these actions and how can I stop this? Because it's so embedded within me, so embedded within the systems that I navigate, that how can I fight that back in a way that is actually making a difference and that is helping others understand what that looks like as well.
Well, thank you for giving to us intellectually and emotionally. I really appreciate that. And I'm sure that the audience does as well. And I wish for you a calm and soothing evening after this. And I just want to encourage everyone to, if they have not yet already, to pick up the MacReads books, and those books will lead you, they will be a pathway to lead you to many other things. And Cinthia, this was a wonderful cap to our MacReads 2021 program. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And again, super happy to be part of this wonderful community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. That's it. Have a good night, everybody.
All right. We are good.
Cool.
Yay!
That was great, Cinthia.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Well, I really mean it. Go have go have whatever it is that creates a good evening and a comforting evening for you. And thanks, Michael, as well.